Hi, welcome to MediatorPodcast.com, a podcast and video series about mediation, negotiation, and collaboration. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I provide online valuation, divorce, and mediation services in St. Louis, Missouri. In this week's episode, we are going to discuss, do you have what it takes to be a mediator? With Kimberly Best. She's a registered nurse, mediator, and conflict coach based in Franklin, Tennessee. She's also authored the book of How to Live Forever, a guide to writing the final chapter of your life story. Also, as our guest is Elliot Herland, a mediator focused on workers' compensation cases based in Minneapolis. He's also the vice chair of the ABA section of dispute resolution in the membership committee. Welcome, Kim and Elliot.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thanks for having us. Oh, by the way, Kim is on that committee too.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So both of them are on the committee.
Yeah.
I'm actually also, I don't know that it matters to you, but I'm on the board of the Tennessee Association of Professional Mediators.
Love it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Elliot, I have done a terrible job on your committee. I don't deserve to be
Oh, you've done great.
Either way, we have some heavy hitters in the mediation world. And I think what we've come here to talk today about, which was a great suggestion from Elliot, is how do you get started in this place? You know, like how, and by way of even talking about our own backgrounds, right? So we have Kim, who's kind of a non-attorney. We have Elliot, who's an attorney. I'm in the finance world, but maybe just getting started in how did each of you get into mediation will help people kind of understand the path. Maybe we'll let Kim go first.
Yeah.
Thank you. So that's a great question. I've spent a lifetime between growing up, my work as an RN in trauma and intensive care and emergency. I've just spent a lifetime seeing extremes of human behavior, places where we're at our worst. And then the tipping point for me was going through a really bad divorce. And the thing I always noted was that this thing called conflict or disagreement, almost no one has been equipped with the tools of how to do it better. And so going through my divorce, my brother, who is an educator, introduced me to Hofstra and their mediation program. So I went just out of interest. I'd already had a psychology background just because I like people. And so the interest in conflict, I went to there, and that introduced me to mediation in general. And then I became just more and more convinced that if we could learn the skills that mediation teaches around how to handle conflict, learn those tools, the world could be a better place, like less fighting and more cooperation. So that began my journey.
That's awesome. Elliot, what about you? What kind of got you into mediation?
I think the first thing a person has to have is passion. They really need to want to be a mediator. For me, I was a litigator. I didn't enjoy many parts of litigation except for mediation. I realized how much I enjoyed mediation, and so that's where my passion took me. Now, the thing is, you need to be patient in achieving all that passion, and you need to figure out a pathway on how to get there. For me, I was fortunate enough to get a position at the Department of Labor and Industry where I would learn how to do mediation. And then, of course, there's the training that's required. But I would say passion, wanting to do it, is the essential ingredient.
Well, and I think it would be helpful too, if maybe Elliot, you can start, is just to give us a little bit of an idea of what kind of mediation you do. Because I think that everybody will start to understand that mediation has a lot of different meanings. So what do you focus on, Elliot?
Well, my focus is on the workers' compensation laws and employment laws in the state of Minnesota. So when people get hurt at work, there's certain laws in place regarding benefits. And when parties are ready, they come in to mediate either about a single issue or maybe about a full, final, and complete settlement of the case.
And Kim, what about you? I know you do a very different mediation.
I do. Elder care, end of life decisions. I do family and civil, but a lot of right now, a big part of my work, I was fortunate enough to have Ken Cloak as a mentor. He did a training when I was in grad school, and I just kind of adopted him. And so Mediators Beyond Borders and some of their programs in there, I've been this year spending a lot of time working with, and that's kind of promoting mediation as a conflict resolution from a community center, well, from an interpersonal way all the way to community, especially around some of the tough issues our country's been facing in the conflict and stuff. So using using mediation as a way to build bridges in our day-to-day life and not just in the legal system.
Well, because part of even being a mediator is like facilitating conversation, listening, trying to help people get through some sort of conflict, whether, in all aspects. So I actually deal with people that are getting divorced, and if they have a business valuation or complex financial situation. So 3 very different ways to use mediation. But I think also, part of it is a personality, part of it is, do you have what it takes to be a mediator? Is it involves some skills. And so what are some of the skills that you've seen? Because after we talk about some of the skills, I think then we can talk about like training and other things that people could actually get into it. But what have you seen, even in yourself, that's been one of the best things that has made you successful in this space? Maybe we'll start with Kim.
Melissa, I want to address your divorce mediation first, if I could. When I started in mediation, my goal, I told myself I would not do divorce mediation. I would try to get people before they got that far down the road, because I believe the tools that are used in mediation are skills that build communication between those two people, right? So I try not to do, I try to keep my people together for mediations as much as possible. So joint sessions. But I wanted the opportunity to be able to have people try to resolve their conflicts and see if their marriage or relationship, if it's not marriage, could be saved. And indeed, it's hard to find clients willing to do that, but indeed it does work. And at the very least, to have the conversation so they maintain some type of a relationship that helps them raise their kids together when kids are involved. So I just, hats off to you for doing that kind of work, especially collaborative, because I think part of our children are suffering because of the acrimony of litigation and how we do divorce now. And offering an option different to that is where I started with my passion.
Well, and psychologically, I think you're right on target. Psychologically, after doing almost 20 years of divorce, if I really identify the top reasons why people get divorced, number 1, people would not imagine, it's communication.
That's exactly
it's then
right.
Communication about money, about romantic relationships, about your kids, but it's always stemming from communication.
That's right.
So it makes sense that people would need that. And maybe if they did start sooner and they could learn how to communicate around those things, they wouldn't get it onto the brink, but who knows?
Exactly what you talked about when you said different definitions of mediation. There are different ways to do mediation, and using it to strengthen relationships, to set a roadmap for how people come together and communicate, is sort of catching the conflict in an earlier form. So the beauty of mediation, and I think people in the public, at least the ones I encounter, when they hear mediation, they either think of things like Elliot's for work inside of corporations and companies, labor reasons, or divorce reasons, and not the breadth of the possibility for mediation in just resolving conflicts at any level. Yeah.
And the difference there, it all involves relationships, but I've always found that broken bones heal quicker than broken hearts. And it's easier to talk about those types of relationships than the intimate relationship involved in a divorce. But as far as skills go, I think it's very important for the mediator to know their place. What I mean by that is letting the parties know, I'm not a judge. I'm not here to weigh evidence, hear testimony, make decisions, tell people what to do. I'm here to facilitate that conversation, provide guidance, but you have to have a perspective on that in knowing that this is their mediation. It's not my mediation. It's not our mediation. And so that's important that they understand and have some responsibility in the process. When they have ownership in the outcome of their mediation, it tends to improve the odds of a successful settlement of the case. The other thing I think, and we may all want to discuss this, is being present without being the smartest person in the room, because you want those attorneys to be the smartest people in the room. Another relationship is the attorney-client relationship, and that's very important to understand that and let them have the spotlight in front of their clients. But listening, perceiving body language, all of those things need to be in place for a skill set. And the other thing is to be humble. And that means accepting that you're going to make mistakes. Perfection is impossible. It's not going to happen. And if you think you're going to be perfect, you're going to be disappointed.
Well, and I've seen some mediation in divorce that usually you have a spouse that is not controlling the money, and you have a spouse that knows everything about the money and or their whole lives, right? And so you have kind of a meeker spouse. It doesn't necessarily have to be a woman or man. It's just it's the role they play. And what happens in the mediation is at the beginning, they're like, well, just tell me what I should do. Just tell me what I should take. Like, tell me if that's okay. Is that a good deal? I don't know. And at the end, usually, and I have a situation right now at the end that they're like, well, I'm going to do this. Well, I would agree to that. Well, that's a very different way of communicating. They now are more educated about the situation. They now have taken their own control of what they want out of the situation. And they're no longer saying to the mediator, just tell me what to do. And so it really is an empowering, system, but it also is because it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And during that process, you grow on how you communicate, if you co-parent and all of that. And any mediation like Kim's doing or Elliot's doing, Kim's dealing with families, another prime space where they have hard times communication, from the past issues or whatever. But I think that those are, and we kind of call some of these people like empaths. Do you think like empaths are better at being mediators, or can you become empathic?
That's a great question. So in the skills section, what skills it takes, the P word that Elliot, I don't think it was on your list, but I think it's a heart for peace.
Oh, yeah.
And for me, that's what finding a peaceful way to do the things. Melissa, what you just described, the demonizing of the other side, that's immediate, And I think the reason it can be hard to bring people to the table to mediation, why they want someone to decide, why they're reluctant to come together, isn't always so much that they, hate the other person that badly. I think I found that people are afraid to find out that maybe they were the problem, right? So they're afraid that someone's going to point and say, you're to blame or you're wrong. So what Elliot described in our, some attorneys use the word neutrality. I use omnipartial. I tell my people when I'm working with them that it is not possible for me to be completely neutral. That what I'm going to do is advocate fiercely for each of you. So whoever is talking, I use that empathy that you talk about. I literally try to put myself in their shoes. And when you do that and can understand them and they feel heard and understood, I think that's when movement starts, right? Because no one budges until someone has heard their story, affirmed their story, acknowledged their truth. So being able to convince people that you can hold two truths is, part of a skill for mediation. So I think the main skill begins with the mediator recognizing their own triggers, knowing their own biases, and being able to be present and comfortable with conflict. Because emotions are contagious, right? And it can get pretty emotional in there. And we have to be able to be calm and allowing of those emotions. I think for mediation, to be more than just about coming to a settlement, to an agreement.
For me, empathy is different than sympathy. Empathy is different than pity. People don't want to have pity or sympathy. They want to be understood. They want someone to validate the feelings that they have. And you can do that without necessarily agreeing with their point of view.
Yeah.
And that's a skill.
I also think a mediator maybe needs to have a mission statement. So your why are you doing this? And I think if you're really clear on that, which it's a fluid thing too, right? But if you're clear on that, I think it'll help. It just helps the process that you're guiding people through in mediation.
Well, and the reality is mediation can be used in business, in life, in communities, in apartment communities. I've talked to Marina about going and doing mediation at colleges. When there are issues with students or teachers or things like that, younger people can connect a little bit better with younger people, not always. But I think that part of what you guys are also talking about is, let's say I've identified that I have the right personality. I think I know something about a certain topic or area, right? Now, what are the rules? What is the training or continuing education that's required or recommended? And then, do I have to abide by mediation rules, right? These are things that people don't always know everything about. You want to take this? You want to start off, Elliot?
Sure. Every state has a different set of rules so that you can qualify as a certified mediator. So I encourage people to look that up. You can actually Google it. And then you find out what preparation you need. It's usually somewhere between a 30 to 40 hour training program that is required. And then there's also continuing education. But I think when I talk about learning the craft, you have to do more than just the training. You have to know what area of law or areas of law do you want to focus? Because it's important to focus in on a particular area or related areas, and then associate yourself with the people in that area. Get people, mentoring, be involved with the organizations like the American Bar Association, Dispute Resolution Section, plug for that. There's other organizations available, but you want to be around potential clients. For me, I would go to the Work Comp Institute or the Work Comp Desk Book so that I can be with the people that I'm looking to work with. And then you have to practice, especially early on in your career as a mediator. You're not going to have clients right away. So you may need to do some pro bono work. You may need to co-mediate or have a mentor that you follow that gives you an example. You want to create a name for yourself.
Well, and I think that another kind of area or another thing that people should consider is that mediation, in my opinion, is a lifelong journey, process, learning, and that anytime that you're around other mediators, you can learn something, a little different perspective, a way to deal with something. I think it's a lot of negotiation techniques too, but also, we're doing a lot of online mediation. I think you could reach out to other mediators and say, could I just be in the back? Could I take notes for you? Right? Could I just be there? And maybe it's said, that somebody else is there. Obviously, it's not right for every but an observer or a note taker, especially if it's in your own firm. If it's in your own firm, I've said, okay, Marina's going to be here and she's going to be taking notes, and we're not charging you for that. It's going to help me be more effective, right? And then I can pay more attention. And at the end, I can look at the notes and be like, okay, maybe I missed some. Oh, I didn't notice that, whereas somebody else did, So I think there's ways that you can get next to really smart mediators and offer to help them. Mm-hmm. Even if you're not on the conversations, you could help them with intake. You could help them with something, right?
I think, Melissa, the thing around that is mediators. When I graduated with my conflict management degree, I could not find a mediator willing to mentor me or let me sit in a mediation. And I think that's been a big problem. So both of you mentioned mentoring. I think the best mediators I know are willing to share everything they have, whether it's their presentation notes, everything they have. And I think to have that heart of, I know it's different than perhaps a lawyer has been raised as far as, generosity of work. I think it's a more compartmentalized sort of practice, but in mediation, we have to help each other grow instead of competing with each other. And I do want to give a shout out to an opportunity that's been incredible as far as connecting with the best in the world. And that is Natalie Armstrong started a Will Work for Food program, which can be seen through LinkedIn. But every single week, they're bringing the best mediators from around the world. And I believe Elliot was one that spoke in that. I don't know, the best mediators around the world, and it's free. An hour spent with these people, and they do want to get to know new people. We're all in this together, right? And when we professionalize our profession, when we raise it to a higher standard, it does all of us good. Mm-hmm. So Will Work for Food is completely free, except they recommend making a donation to a food bank instead of paying for that. Whatever the topic is. It was a beautiful topic with Dean Song Richardson from California this week on diversity. And they've raised $80,000 so far for food banks just through this program. So LinkedIn is a great source for finding other mediators and actually connecting with them. For me, it's been the best because I can email connections to people, request, and I wouldn't hear back. But on LinkedIn, you can send a message and most people respond. But it is about building the relationships, as both you and Elliot said.
Since we're name dropping, Susan Guthrie is also someone who does a great job of training all sorts of things And one of the things is how to use the online platform, which is very important. That's another skill set, since, I mean, many people have been doing virtual mediations for years. I didn't start doing virtual mediation until the pandemic hit. And then this in-person mediator had to learn how to use that platform. And Susan does a great job with that.
And she just put out a great video, I think really like this past week or something, even about hybrid mediations,
Yes,
right?
I read that.
Because, and this kind of piggybacks on what Kim was saying, you know,
Watch.
there's been a lot of people out there doing mediation, but then the pandemic hit and it was like, oh my gosh, nobody could have predicted that the courts would close. And how could we predict that almost a year later, we have courts that are still closed for all intents and purposes? So we kind of had people had to be pushed out into this mediation space, if you will. And now everybody's either like, well, I've been doing this for a while. Like, yeah, you know, like let's get together and talk more about our skills. But it also kind of gets us to everything has changed. Everything, you know, like everything that we knew is how it was done. You know, I was talking to somebody last night and I was like, when are we going to rewrite the story? When are we going to stop saying this is how it was done? This is how we used to do things. This is how I knew how to do it. When are we going to write the story of how it is happening and how we are going to see it happening? So what do you guys see as the future of mediation for mediators, for people, for anybody wanting to get into this space? Because it's hot. It's a lot going on right now.
That is such a good question. That's a great question. So I'll tell you what my hope for the future of mediation is. I think, yeah, I just had a brilliant. I'm glad this isn't live because I knew this would happen. It just left. Elliot, go ahead.
Well, I think where you were going with that is that mediation takes a bigger role in the resolution of all kinds of issues. For instance, for me, it involves certain legal issues specific to a certain area of the law. Melissa, I think you're also involved in a very specific area of the law. And Kim, you're in an extremely interesting area that I didn't even know there was mediation involved in your area of expertise.
So my hope for the future of mediation is that it becomes the first choice in conflict dispute, not litigation, that it's mediation first. And that the skills that it takes to mediate and what people learn about handling conflict in mediation is expanded to a personal level, so that we can learn to mediate in our own homes, in relationships, in communities, in making decisions around the government. Yeah. So my hope is that it's. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. The exciting thing about mediation is that it is so new. And I think in it being so new, the potential is limitless. But I think it's our responsibility as mediators to help keep it in elevated conditions. So I know people who've done mediation and they're like, or have been to mediation and they say, oh, that was terrible. So there's going to be, growth and pain, but I think we keep making it as professional, as thorough, as comprehensive in skills that are around not just how to reach agreement, but all the things Elliot mentioned, including, how best to handle conflict, how best to empower people to make those decisions. That the potential is limitless after that, as far as mostly using it as a form of conflict resolution before litigation.
Right. And I think it's important for us to understand that mediation will not necessarily work in the idea of it's going to settle, but it prepares people for litigation, because some cases need to be heard either by a judge or an arbitrator or a jury, whatever the case might be. So I think what we want is for mediation to either be a bridge toward peace, or a bridge toward a more informed litigation.
Well, and there are some times where we can mediate, maybe there's 5 issues and we can mediate 2 or 3 or maybe even 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell people, listen, we don't have to be like, this isn't grade school. We don't have to get 100. We don't have to be perfect. But if we can limit it to really one issue that the judge has to deal with and that you guys really can't figure out, that's going to be way more cost effective than having all of these issues that are clouded. And I think that that's one way. Right now you have a lot of courts that you're going into litigation and then the court is kicking you back out to mediation and saying, okay, you need to at least go to 2 hours of mediation before you can come back to court, or mandatory mediation before they can even go to court to begin with. Like a lot of states already have that in play, or counties, and they're looking for people to help with that situation. When I tell people, could you be an expert witness? I say, sure. Anybody can be an expert witness if you stick to what you're good at and you do something of passion, right? I love what I do, so I'm going to be better at it. It's the same with mediation. There's mediation in all realms, but if you pick to do mediation in a realm that you love and that you have passion for, then that's where you're going to be most successful. And it, right? You could mediate electrical issues. I don't know if you were an electrician, right? It doesn't mean that you have to have really any skill set or any background. It's, do you have the love and passion for that? And then can you hone some of that? But interpersonal and then sharing everything. The other thing that you said is like sharing between mediators. You really have to start to see that there is no competition, that in the mediation, the way you show up as you is a big part of it. And so I'm not for everyone. Neither is any mediator, but there are times where if you can hone how you connect with people and you can listen and you can be empathetic, that makes you a better mediator because you can deal with different types of people. And that, I think, helps you be successful.
Absolutely. Melissa, as far as the future of mediation and the when you described that things are in litigation and then they, or mediation is mandated before you can move forward, what I would like to see is mediation first. Because going through the litigation process itself is building acrimony, particularly in families. So the opportunity, they're further apart because of the process, the legal process. So if we could do mediation early in the process, I think it would make our job easier, but it would also make the outcomes better for them. It would keep those relationships from becoming so fractured as they do. I also one more comment that I meant to make before about the practice of mediation. I think community mediation centers are a great place to start honing your skills. And especially now with the court backlogs, I know our community mediation centers are starting to alleviate those, and we're taking the non-represented cases. So there's a lot of pro bono mediation for that and a lot of learning opportunity. And those are situations where there's co-mediation. So they're pairing up people who have experience with newer people. What a great opportunity to learn how to mediate.
Absolutely. And I think that where people can think, okay, well, how could I be involved in mediation? Again, it goes back to what is your own education. When I said to Marina to go to colleges, it's because she's just fresh out of college, right? But she knows what it was like to be in college, to experience it, to have issues with teachers or friends or whatever, right? And she could be beneficial in that. And I think that, Kim, you had a medical background and now you help people and families at the end of life. That makes sense. That's not a place that I would fit in well. And the same with Elliot. He understands workers' comp legal issues and is dealing with workers and companies. Again, probably not where my strong suit would be. And so it's kind of there is a lot of lucrativeness in this space. You're going to get paid by the hour. You're going to bill at hourly chunks. You're going to get paid immediately. Sometimes, and sometimes if you're cheaper, somebody might work with you, even though you're trying to learn it. But I think you have to have a base knowledge of something. Whatever you go into that mediation space, it's like, well, I have 20 years of divorce experience, so I'm going to help you with that. Or I have 20 years of valuation experience and I can help you with that. But if you're going to ask me something about the end of life, I'll be like, and that's where you're going to show up not as strong. And so I think it's building that. But then it's okay. So let's say we do all of those things. We get experience, we get trained. There's usually always training. Then how do I pull in business? How did you guys, Elliot, when you decided to shift from being an attorney, how did you go and get business? Now we know relationships, we know those types of things, but what other conscious things did you do in your practice?
Well, I was fortunate in going from practice to the Department of Labor and Industry, where people were funneled into me. So the marketing wasn't as important because like court systems will go to a roster of mediators. Here I was a mediator where parties would go for work comp. And then after that, I went to the Union Construction Workers' Compensation Program as the dispute resolution facilitator and doing mediations for both systems now. So people got to know me. But it's interesting because once you leave that type of environment, now you're on your own and people might know you, but maybe they don't want to use you, or maybe they do. But it's important that they know you're there. You develop a certain personality, but then again, you need to participate. You need to get out there and be with people it was a lot nicer when you could be in person and you could take people out to lunch. But you need to have a website. So that you can be found, especially people who are more geared toward the computer. People in my age group, it's word of mouth. But when someone doesn't know you, if they Google you and you don't have a website, well, now you've lost a lot of credibility. Right. Reputation, you need to be persistent, and you need to work. You need to have that, to use another P word, I guess, perspiration. You got to put some sweat into it, some skin in the game, and learn how to promote yourself.
What about you, Kim? What got you?
So it's all relationships. I mean, I did learn, I've heard that our profession is not one that you can advertise for. It just doesn't really work, but you have to build relationships. And like Elliot said, you have to put yourself out there. So giving talks on conflict, giving talks on what is mediation, speaking to groups, but also joining whatever professional organizations like the ABA, like your local, whatever your state organization is. They'll often offer either free or reasonably priced continuing education, networking with like people, and then using every opportunity to promote mediation, not yourself as a mediator, and you can, of course, I'm not saying don't, but mediation in general, like you said, the many uses. I mean, you described having area of expertise when you mediate, which is also what Elliot talked about as far as having passion. Your passion is your area of expertise. A lot of people, I know a lot of, really good mediators who, because the skill set is the same across the board, have become so good at their skill set that they can mediate anything, a broad range of things, because we don't necessarily have to be experts in a certain field to be good mediators. Though I think it helps tremendously. And as a non-attorney mediator, there are places where I think an attorney mediator would be way better served than me. Depending on what I do feel like I have enough knowledge that for people to be able to come out with their best agreement.
Yeah, and I think as an expert at this, you guys could probably mediate anything, right? Because you've built the knowledge of how to mediate, how to get people to get to a different position. Like all of those are the skills that I think you can only learn in mediation. Like there's certain things I'll test out negotiation tactics, like on my yard guy. I'll be like, okay, I'm going to see how and test it out with your friends. I mean, because why not see how humans make decisions based on knowledge? Like I don't always know how somebody's going to react. So like I test out things on my husband or my friends or Marina. No, I don't do that. I'm just saying, but I think that's like I don't read self-help books. I read negotiation books. I read business books. Like that's my self-care, if you will. But I think that what were you going to say, Elliot? You were going to have another point about how you bring in business and how you connect?
Well, I think one of the most important things to your relationship with other people and your reputation is to be professional.
Yeah.
You cannot come into this in a overly casual way. You don't want to be too stiff either. You don't want to be boring. You have to have a personality, but always underlying that is you need to be a professional. You're being paid. So unless you're doing pro bono, and even then you are being paid because you're getting to exercise those mediation muscles and build up that strength to get you and the people you're serving.
But even if you're doing pro bono, I think this is the difference, because I'll do this when I go and testify, right? Or if I'm getting deposed. When I go into a deposition, first of all, I've been reading a lot of stuff and they say show up to impress yourself, right? To just show up and be there and be the best that you are, right? For yourself. But then the next thing is I'm not trying to impress my client or my attorney. I'm here to make sure that the other attorney will never hire anybody else after he's gone through my deposition or I've been on the other side of him, right? And it's the same with pro bono. There's a lot to be said of how because, like I'm on a case right now that I was appointed by the court, and everybody's clearly identified that I have not gotten paid anywhere near what 3 years of work has been, but that's okay. But I was appointed by the court and that's fine. To me, professionalism shows up when you are not fairly compensated, when you are doing pro bono, or you are there. Do you show up professionally? Do you do the best you can do in all situations, regardless? Because what I told the attorney, I said, I'm not here any longer to get paid. Obviously, I'm not here for the attorney or the clients or anything. I'm here for the judge. I was appointed by the judge. I will show up and I will represent my reputation, not what anybody else did. And I think that that says more to your own character, how you show up in any of those situations. So if you're starting out, absolutely, I think you should take every single opportunity as very important and put the same method. You know, when we all probably started out, we started doing stuff for the organization, national organizations. We started offering to speak. We started offering to write articles, to write blogs, you know, any of these things. You can offer up information and people will like that, you know, and they will put it out there. And so I don't think it's as hard as people think. And with the pandemic, you got to reach out to people and just try to connect in some capacity. I think
All
that
the time.
this podcast has been very helpful for us. It's one of, you know, I've told people before, there is not a chance in heck that, but for the pandemic, that I would be able to have Kim Best and Elliot Herland on a podcast, because you guys are busy and you're going places. Kim, you're in Hawaii right now filming this. We couldn't do it. Huh? Oh, that was a secret. Sorry.
No, I'm kidding. No, you know, I want to go back to the professionalism you described, either being an expert witness or working for the judge. I think in our field, it is important to remember that our clients are who we're working for. And I say that because I actually had a sort of a debate with another mediator from a faraway state who felt like she was working for the attorneys. And I think if your motives are pure, your process is pure, you're doing the right thing, attorneys will hire you. They may not agree with you, but if you are fiercely advocating for your clients, which is our job as a mediator, right? Not trying to impress attorneys or get new business. I've just found, as geeky as this sounds, in my life, that doing the right thing gets results. So it might not be as quick as you know, being aggressive, and it's not a quick process. I mean, building a practice in mediation is not a quick process. You're not going to become a mediator and have a whole lot of clients. And there are a lot of people who teach on marketing your mediation practice, because it is hard to get a full-time mediation practice because it's new. That's also why it's exciting, because it's new. But keep remembering, you know, why you're doing what you're doing and who your clients are, and the people that you're working for, are the people that you're helping to bring together.
Well, and I think sometimes telling, you know, not everything in life is black and white, right? Some of it's gray, but sometimes to just deal with the black and white issues as just factual, and that it's truth. You know, like there's sometimes where I'll say something, or somebody could say something in mediation, and that, you know, it's going to be a little bit hard for one party to hear, and and one other party might be happy with the information, but it just is the information, and it is the next step, you know, the ramifications of that data, right?
That's right.
I think sometimes just having, you know, in litigation, you're going to hide that. You're going to be like, oh, we don't want to tell them because it's bad for us, but it's good for them, and da-da-da. Whereas in mediation, you're just saying, listen, here's the good, here's the bad. What are we going to do with it? And that's sometimes it's not easier to hear, but it's easier to hear when you're both together. And then you can see that I'm not trying to be on either one side. I'm just saying that this is the information.
I agree. I mean, I think we normalize these things that are difficult and conflict, that we normalize it, that these things are life, and we bring them into conversation. And then we empower people to have confidence in their decision making, and we explore as many options as possible so that they can come out with results that they're happy with, so that they can write their own stories and make their own decisions. So yeah, we're responding and helping them to respond instead of reacting.
And there's the you know, we talked about the process and the journey, and so moving litigators into negotiators and getting them to to be more interest-based as opposed to positional, and then moving the parties along, and don't give up. Don't give up, because sometimes people need to take a break. So you go as far as you can, but you don't give up. I had a case where after quite a few hours, and I went from
Did Elliot just freeze?
I think so.
we all
Elliot,
There he
just,
goes.
Am I back?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was fun. It was like,
Everybody went spinning. All right. So you go from facilitative to evaluative, and they kind of did that after I made the media's proposal. They all just froze, and it wasn't going to get it done. So they took some time off, and then we scheduled a second session. We weren't going to give up. And after a couple more hours, we did get it done, and it didn't require a mediator's proposal. The mediator's proposal was the next jumping off point. Sometimes a mediator will say, oh, well, they didn't settle. And I don't know that those mediators are as successful as those who don't give up.
Absolutely. And I think that the empowering the clients to make their own decisions really starts to work well. I know that in one situation, we were at an impasse and we had everything else done. And it was just this one thing, but it was kind of a big thing, but I couldn't see any way around it. You know, I usually mediate with another attorney or mental health professional. They couldn't see anything around it. The one person that actually got us through was the meeker of the parties. It was the more passive person in the couple. It was that person that finally stood up and said what she needed and what she wanted, and that was the solution. And it was like an aha moment, but it took that person all the way, because our mediations don't last 2 or 4 hours. Like the mediations that I'm involved in could be months. It could be 10, 20, 30, 40 plus hours, right? To get through all of these complex financial issues. But it was fascinating that at the point that, you know, through all that process, you know, and we were all like, oh, why can't we get this one thing? Well, because we didn't know how it could be solved in her. And once she was able to enunciate how it could be solved in her, all the pieces fell into place, right? And then we were like, oh, that's it. And it does sometimes seem like a miracle or an aha, but it takes that many people to kind of look at the same situation and then say, okay, how can we look at this different? How can we see it different? And it's sometimes hard for attorney. I think that from an attorney going from being, you know, an advocator to a mediator, it's harder in their own head and their own actions to stop, like, you know, being so forceful about one party or the other. It's a lot harder for them to sit back and listen and try to be like, well, now what do you think? You know, it's a very, and so they kind of have to, they might know everything. They might have the training, the skills, the knowledge and everything, but they have to untrain how they have dealt with conflict.
Melissa, I'm thinking that is so well said. I'm thinking that you have to become an expert in asking questions, right? But you have to become an expert in asking the questions that you don't know the answers to. And I know one time when I was testifying for a medical issue, I was told never ask a question, that attorneys are taught never to ask a question that they don't know the answer to. But that's the opposite, right, of mediation. You have to be willing to open that can of worms and confident that no matter what comes out. You talked earlier about, you know, something might upset someone else. I mean, you go in going, something will upset something else, but that's going to be the keys. Like that's the start of the process, is the upset, and what the gift is, what the answers are underneath that. So you have to become an expert in answering questions asking questions and asking questions that you don't know the answers to,
Mhm.
and willing to say, okay, wrong one, wrong one, wrong one. Bingo, that's the question that worked.
The
Yeah,
The question that I like to use is when I'm bringing up a topic that the other side feels is one of their strengths. I'll say what it is that the other side is saying, and then say, okay, so what am I missing? What are they missing? So that I can help explain your perspective, because many times we're in caucus style. People are in separate rooms or on Zoom, separate breakout rooms. And so asking people, what am I missing, will oftentimes bring it out.
Yeah.
And letting them know it's confidential is also very important. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that what my frustration is sometimes in general, right, is people negotiate from a position of no power. And they just negotiate and they just say, you know what? I want that green box and that's what I want. And I don't, and that's what I'm saying. I'm like, but like, you don't actually, like, none of you own that green box. Like, it doesn't, but people negotiate from, I think if people start to negotiate from a sense of knowledge, and you can't get to the knowledge, so everybody wants to go in fighting based on, assumptions, right? We know what happens with assumptions, but it's even deeper. It's you want to fight about something based on your belief of what the other person thinks. And I'm like, why don't we just start with, what do you think? What do you know? Like, why don't we just start to clear the air and say, okay, if we had a situation, because we help big companies negotiate. And we had a situation where I was like, I think that this is what they're saying, but if it's not, we got a big problem, right? So let's just first check and see if that's what they're saying. And we said it and we clarified, and it was better than what we thought. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, stop talking. We're good with it. Yeah, stop. But I think that that's part of it, is that if, especially in any situation where there's conflict, if you can both start to, like, let's all be on even playing ground with the facts, with the knowledge. Like, instead of me thinking, Kim looks kind of mad, she's always pissed at me, things like that. And Elliot's so nice. Let's just ask them. Right. It could be reversed.
I don't know if am I pointing toward you?
This way.
Melissa,
Nice.
the language I use for that, everyone comes in with their story, right? And the other person's wrong and they're right. Like, people ask me in mediation, do people come in thinking they're so right? Yeah, both sides come in thinking they're right and the other's wrong. That's just a given. So I use the language, they say their story, and I know that, it includes, I know that they're, they write their story for the other person. So I say, so the story you're telling yourself about Elliot is, blah, blah, blah. So I make it clear that, we don't know if that's true. We'll ask Elliot if that's true, but what you're telling yourself. So I use the story you're telling yourself a lot, which is a Brene Brown thing. Kudos to her for introducing that we make up a story in our mind about the other person's motives, and then it becomes our truth. And that the truth is, we need to confirm that to find out what their truth is. Yeah.
And bias comes in there too, and it's not just the bias of the parties and the attorneys, but it's also the bias of the mediator, and you need to check in with that as far as how you're perceiving the people you're working with. And making sure that you are hearing stories and not doing that confirmation bias where you think you know what the answer is, because that's when you start to trip into some dangerous area, when you think you know what the answer is, and that might not be the answer. It's their answer.
it's a subtlety, because I had a situation recently where I'll change some of the circumstances so that they don't know. But that I had a mediator that came in. So let's say one spouse, right? So it was kind of a gender thing. And so the male mediator came into the female and very professional, right? Goes in to the husband. Hey, hey, where are you? Making jokes like, how's the weather? How's the cards? How's it? And I was like, and I'm being a little bit obnoxious about it. It was not, it was not to that extent. It was way more subtle. It was, they came in and was just like professional, and they came into the other party and made a joke. And I was like, to me, it was like bright as day. And I was like, whoa, how did you? But I don't think they saw it, because it was like a subtlety. And really, if no one brought it up, like, I'm always paying attention, though. I'm paying attention to everybody. Right. And so I thought that was an interesting, and we had a conversation about it. And, because it's sort of like, if somebody has stuff in your teeth, don't you want somebody to tell you? Like, I felt like we had a relationship that I could say something, but and they got it. But those are the types of implied or implicit bias, that I would normally maybe see a woman and be like, oh, cute purse, love it. Even something like that, it's already changing the dynamic, like, I have to come in and treat everyone just regardless of race, gender, anything. Right? I can't be too familiar. I can't be too because that's what we do in relationships. Like, what do you guys think about that? Because maybe you use that sometimes, but I think that we have to be careful with how we kind of approach that. And, because I've seen it in the courthouse, we've seen it all along, that we're all like in the courthouse, the hallway, and we're like, hey, what's going on? Hey, yeah. And then we get to the courtroom, and we're like, Your Honor, how are you? Or the other attorney, like, we ignore them, or the other expert, but I think that you have to be careful, because if the clients see that, they're going to take it very differently. So
rapport and trust measured with that professionalism is such a hard thing to balance. And the example that you gave, of course, was someone who was a little bit out of balance and needed to rein it back a little bit and maybe loosen it up in the other room. You need to know who your audience is. And in your pre-mediation, like when I talk to the attorneys ahead of time, I try to find out a little bit more about their clients, their dispositions, what their interests are, what their favorite sports team is, or do they like to go fishing? Try to find something that you can add to the conversation without distracting from the purpose of the mediation. Because if they don't trust you, it becomes much more difficult to guide them down the road, the journey of mediation.
You gave me that advice before. You said, like, you do some research on the attorneys and whatever. So I did it recently for another expert. Worked perfect. Like, I looked at, like, what were his passions? What was he interested in? And there was at some point, and that's where I think all these skills you can use in any space, right? But there was at one point where things were starting to get tense. And I knew that if we talked about music or we talked about whatever, which is passion, right? And you have to figure out how to interject it and things like that. It's not always easy. But I knew that we could kind of bring it back, like we could kind of get it out of that space. Because I think that another issue that I think, because at this point I'm just like throwing out because I want some good advice. Another issue I think is that a lot of people say you have to stop being emotional in this. And I exactly, Kim. I don't think so. I think that we need to be better at how we deal with it, not making them do a certain way.
100% right. So to go back to the professionalism and how we show up, I was trained in mediation, So you mentioned it before. My goal is to empower two people to make their best decision, right? And hopefully to see each other as humans, to be able to preserve some type of relationship, whatever that is, but they own the process. And in doing that, I can't come in having more power over them, right? So even how I dress is an issue. Am I coming in so that I look like a judge or an attorney in a litigation part, not a mediator? I need to be elevating them and not myself. So that means that I don't doubt that I'm probably warmer than, maybe an attorney might be in this. So I am more personal. I tell stories about me, how I can relate to I get it. This happened to me. So the things that make connection, that empower them to be understood. It's interesting, they comment about the purse or something. I get that shows, our own bias in that. But I think I'm going to be thinking about that. But I think my role is to make them as comfortable, heard, and empowered so that they can have discussions, which means keeping myself at a non-elevated, non-expert level as far as they're concerned. They're the experts on them. I'm just helping them guide, what's...
And that's what I think I took away from what Elliot just said was, you know what, I could go in and say, oh, cute purse or something like that. I just need to do the same thing. So when I go into the husband, it's like, oh, nice tie or da da da. And so I could build the rapport. I just need to do it on a consistent level. I think that's right. That was a good one, Elliot. I like that.
Well said. Very well said. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So a couple other things that I think are interesting is, this concept of using the virtual world and networking. So, and I think that this is not just for networking, but, the virtual world has kind of changed mediation as well. And so in that capacity, what do you think, at this point, we're a year into a pandemic. I gotta be honest with you. I think in another year, we're going to be okay. So what do you think we're going to keep from this pandemic economy, which is what I call it right now? And what do you think we're not going to keep? Like, what do you think has really been helpful in mediation, either from growing your business or even just from doing mediation this way?
Go ahead, Kim.
Well, someone asked me early in the pandemic, what's been the good side of this? And at that point, I didn't recognize. But like you said earlier, we're able to connect with people in places we never have before. Right. And that's mind-boggling. I would have never met Elliot or you or just about anybody. My world was so much smaller. I think we found that there's some benefits. While I miss personal mediation, there are losses, to be had for not mediating one-on-one. There are subtleties, there's connection. There are some things that we're sacrificing. But on the flip side of that, it's made mediation in some ways easier. I think people do tend to feel more empowered in their own homes or wherever they're having their mediation from. Mostly, we've been able to outreach to, more people to just say what we do and be available to more people because of this. I mean, just what we've saved on travel time alone, right? So I have the question that's being pulled, of course, is what will happen when we get everything back? And I think across the board, people think that we're going to be keeping this as a form of mediation. I heard one case of someone who representing a big company that would have flown for mediation say, I'll never have to fly again. I can do this virtually. So it's opened up a lot of potential. I don't think we should sacrifice the times that we can connect for making it all virtual. I think it'll be a hybrid. And I think that's across the board, not just in our profession, but just about in everything. We've found a new way to do things. Yeah.
I think obviously LinkedIn is a good place for professional networking. People are also using Facebook for that. There's some who use TikTok. I don't, but there are some who do. I think websites are very important, and this virtual mediation that we're doing now, I think that's going to be a piece of our business, whether it's all virtual or hybrid, where you're with some people and you're with the other people through the computer.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some challenges there. And again, Susan Guthrie does a nice job of talking about those challenges.
Yeah, and I think that everybody should go watch her recent video because it actually brought to light some of the issues about the hybrid. But the only analogy that I can use is like my kids have dance class on Saturdays. So it snowed, right? And I was like, oh, we're going to miss dance class. No, we aren't. It's by Zoom, like there's certain things. And it's the same if you have domestic abuse issues in mediation. That was we had protocols of how people would come into the building, how people would leave the building, when, how, everything, right? It doesn't need to be necessary. Like if that person feels such horror being in the space of somebody else, why are we doing it? Why shouldn't, or if you have a mediation, because we're always trying, for collaborative, you're scheduling 6 people or more. And it's very hard to get 6 people consistently to meet together. Well, what if one person gets a sick kid or something happens? It's going to be nice to be able to still keep that meeting, have the one person come in with Zoom or Skype or something. But the logistics of that, like we thought the logistics were interesting doing all online or all in person. Now, if you have a hybrid, and it's not like it's impossible, but I think you need to be getting prepared for it now. Like, how can you continue to operate? Even when we had a snow day recently, I was like, do we really have snow days anymore? Like, aren't all of us capable of working at any point, at any time now? Those are great things. But then it's how do you establish the boundaries and how do you establish, how we work within those and be prepared because, she said in her video, which I thought was true, you need to get prepared for it now. Maybe we're not going to have hybrid for the next year, right? But when it hits, if you already have the technology and you already have the capability, you will win in the eyes of a lot of people because you facilitated something and solved a problem that nobody else could. So I think it's going to be important.
Absolutely.
The online has helped clients as well, and the courts and in things like the landlord-tenant cases that are, or the civil cases for non-payment and things. People had a hard time getting to court, especially unrepresented people. So it's helped them be able to do it on their time from their home. Transportation can be hard. Childcare can be hard. So even in the legal system, I think I've heard judges say, they're liking this. They're still doing their cases just fine.
It's a whole different ball game to do online trials and online depositions. But when I show up at 10 a.m. for court and I actually go on the stand, that's unheard of. Like we never were doing that in real court. Like you just went there and you kind of hung out forever. And hopefully you made it on the stand by after lunch or the day's over, So I think there's a lot of efficiencies that are happening and it's in a space that we needed the efficiencies. I was happy because we were already doing a lot online, how we present valuations in general. It's easier to do it on a Zoom where you can show everybody the same numbers. But it got the clients to come to where we were already. And that I was grateful for because we're a lot more efficient. If we could just do it, like instead of getting everybody in the conference room and doing that, hey, can we just do it in 3 days at noon? Okay, great. That was unheard of. So I think that there's going to be a ton that we keep from this pandemic economy. But now we all have to think, and that's where I think her video came into play. We have to think, okay, here's what we know. We know how it was. We know how it currently is. And I believe that we're in a pandemic economy. That's what I'm calling it. And we have another year, right? So the next year, we're still going to be in some form of this pandemic economy. How do you operate now, but then in the short term for the year? And then how are you ready when we flip, right? And it's not going to be a fast flip. It's going to be a progression. But are you ready for that next economy? And that's where I think it's really going to take creative minds and paying attention to those that are kind of coming before us. You know, Susan's trying to pave the way and say, okay, you guys need to get some technology, you need new speakers, new audio, all of it. It's like, but we all just got used to doing this, you know, so it's going to be ever changing. And I think that's, for me, it's exciting. I think it also creates opportunities because not everybody is going to want to do it. Not everybody wants to do online. That when this first started, everybody was like, how could we possibly mediate without being in person? There's so much. How can I testify without being in person? Because there's so much that I see, right? I see on your face. If I can't see it, if I can't see a judge, like literally go, huh? What? You know, because then I'm like, oh, okay, need to circle back around there, you know, or them go, you know, like it's hard when you're doing all this, or even here, like, am I looking at Elliot? Am I looking at Kim? Like, how am I doing this? Am I paying attention? You know, I think those are the things that you have to practice and you have to hone those skills. But what other big advice do you have for people starting out, or even people like me? Like, I think you guys are light years ahead of me in the mediation techniques and things like that. Like, what could I learn or do better, or somebody starting out?
Boy, let's restart the program.
Okay.
And go through everything we just said. I guess passion, patience, a path, and persistence. That's what you need. That's what you need. And then be humble and be compassionate to yourself, so that you can be compassionate to other people.
See, that was perfect.
That was really well said, Elliot. That was really nice. Yeah. Yeah. And it's true. Kind of everything that we said summarizes that. I think don't be afraid to ask for help too.
Oh, yeah.
You know, reach out to people. It's interesting. When I do mentor people, and because I made a commitment to do that because of having such a hard time finding a mentor, right? And the people that are, if you can just find the people that are willing to help, it is such a process. I mean, like Elliot said, patience in the process. That I have a meeting coming up with someone that I have so much respect for. I was in a mediator that I'm, you know, a little bit intimidated because I am newer on this process. It's only been, you know, 6 or 7 years for me. So I think, you know, recognizing that we're learning all the time. Like you said, Melissa, I love that when you talked about co-mediating with someone, because I have my own business, right? And sometimes there's a benefit to someone being able to see what I can't see. I mean, that's what we bring to mediation, right? That we help people see what they can't see on their own, because we only know what we know. So trying to be objective with myself, you know, how did that go, to run it through my head. I mean, that's a benefit for having a co-mediator, is they can see things that you can't. And which is wonderful, because a light bulb can come in from that, but also they can recognize maybe, you know, where improvement can be had. So like you, I'm always reading, you know, and on my kitchen table, on my desk, I usually have one of Ken Cloke's books, either Mediating Dangerously or, one of his that I refer to help not fall into the trap of treating each mediation the same. Like, I don't want to do that, right? I want to go in aware that each person's story is unique, and to go in being as much in the present as possible. And, literally for me, I go into a mediation with a prayer for grace and wisdom, and to make it not about me ever in that mediation, to keep the focus on the clients and let them own their outcome, which can be really hard when you think, oh, this could be better here, this could be better here, or maybe they're this. I mean, to recognize it is their story, and,
Right.
that I'm helping them write their story.
Yeah.
So
It's their path. It's
mhm.
their journey. And, we could all just sit here and be like, well, I could tell you where you're going to be at the end, that could be great. But I think everybody has to go through their own journey in this process, in general, or in mediation.
It never turns out like I think it'll turn out. I think if we stay in the moment while we're doing what we do without our own agenda, if it turns out how I think it's going to turn out, then maybe I was driving it to get it there. And if that's the case, it's not mediation. You know what I'm saying? True mediation. So, I think that's part of the challenge. It's like Elliot said, regulating ourselves and is probably one of the hardest things, and then being open to the emotion. So I really would, for mediators to become skilled at understanding emotions, conflict, the biology of emotions and conflict. If you understand the biology of it, then what looks like too much or abnormal to us because we name things like anger as a problem it is like we talked about. It just is. So we accept that, and we ask questions to explore that, and what need is missing from that, and all those things. So to become comfortable in that is quite the process.
Yeah.
Well, and I think even, people get confused because we talk about mediation and meditation, and they're obviously different. But I think there is a part at the beginning of mediations to do some form of meditation where you're like, let's clear out my bias. Let's clear out my rose-colored tinted glasses that I'm going to look at this. And how do I just kind of let myself witness it and be present and listen to what this specific, because even if I've done 100 million divorces, not any of them have been alike.
That's right.
They all have pieces, like I can usually see like dynamics happening, and that helps me, right, understand some underlying issues. But reality is, no business that I've ever looked at has ever been the same. And so I think that you do kind of have to, like kind of zen yourself, clear it out, pray, whatever it is that you kind of center yourself. Because I think that people also, and some people have talked about this, being a mediator is emotionally draining as well.
Oh, yeah.
And so you have to kind of go in and then come back out. Okay, we're not going to take all this with me, because that's a lot of pain and anger that is not mine at all, right? But we have to be there in the moment, and we have to understand it. So I think there is a lot of that there, just to keep your own self-centered and maybe focused.
Melissa, you don't even know how spot on you are in that. I attended a 2-year, he did 1 year and then 2 years, with William Ury and Thomas Hubel, who is he's a mystic. We all know who William Ury is, of Getting to Yes. They did a 2-year mediators campfire talk, is what they ultimately called Mediate and Meditate. And it was, so William Ury talks about going to the balcony as a mediator, which means, looking down with an open mind at that, even at our own behavior, so that we're moderating our own behavior during that, and helping our clients do that too. But one of my favorite things in that I use a lot, that people enjoy, is a quote by William Ury. He says, "Speak in anger and you'll make the best speech you'll ever regret." So understanding when people are speaking in anger, that is not their truth. You know,
Right.
their truth is when they're speaking, that's a reaction. So when we're responsive, our job is to help people become responsive and not reactive. So meditation is a great way to do that, and it is becoming popular and common. Not, you know, to sit in a yogi position and
Right.
but to center and mostly stay in the moment, because our reactions are also always tied to our past. They're tied to what we know in the past. They're never about what's going on in this moment, right?
Yeah.
So our responses are. So you're spot on with that. It's and bringing that, emotions are contagious. So if we're riled up or responsive or reactive, our clients will sense that. You can feel that in a room.
Yeah. And my friend Mike Gregory told me once that it's harder to be an active listener. Like normally we're all listening, right? Kind of. I'm not always listening, but I try. But we're listening. But to be an active listener, we have to just listen without trying to calculate our response.
Right.
And that's hard because even now that we're talking, right? We're listening, but we're like, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? And it's the same thing in mediation, to just listen. And that's where I think some techniques of mirroring or repeating or reframing help you, because then that gives you the time to think about your response, right? It's all a cadence in some respect. And how do you give yourself some time to think of your response so that you can actively listen when you're in the moment and hear what they're saying, not like, oh, that's a good point. Oh, you know, which is all of our brain's natural tendencies, I think.
I keep a little notepad next to me and I'll jot down a word if I can, so that I can stay with you, because like earlier, I completely forgot what I was going to say. I always think of that as a bad sign, but maybe it's a good sign. You know, maybe it's because thanks. Or dementia.
You won't know about it though. It's fine.
Elliot, you're about to say something.
Elliot?
I forgot. No, I'm kidding. I think it's important that I come in calm and optimistic and open.
Right.
So when someone has anger, you don't shut it down. You let the storm go. You let the storm pass through. You try not to take it personally, even though it might feel personal at times. You have to understand why it does, because of who you are in the process. And then stay calm, stay optimistic. Because like Kim said, it is contagious. It does affect a person. And if they feel as though their anger has been heard and perhaps validated without necessarily agreeing, you know, you're entitled to that feeling. Now let's think about how to work through that so that you can be in a better place.
Yeah, I think the frequency of the room is set by the highest frequency person. And so if you can't kind of pull that person back down in some capacity, which in general, when somebody gets to that heightened emotional, everybody else escalates with them, right? And so that's how you keep the power. Whereas if you have the mediator is kind of staying here, which is hard. It's hard to not get, as an empath, it's hard to not get emotionally charged when other people's are. And that's where I think it takes the centering, is to kind of pull it down and say, no, I'm going to stay. It also kind of, maybe Kim, you deal with this in your work, is the grief process. You know, in grief, I think, or if you have kids, you know, like go into the emotion, go all the way. In some, you know, like I'm like, if you're mad, if you're whatever, like you were saying, Elliot, like go all the way in. Are we done? now let's come back. Because again, if this has been pent up, and I've always been wanting to say this because you wronged me when you threw away those dishes, or, whatever it is, sometimes it's just something that we didn't even know, that wasn't a huge deal, like we're not perceiving it to be a huge deal, but to get it done and aired and out changes the whole dynamic. And so that's why I've always been like, no, we can't, like I deal with divorce, and they're like, how do you deal with the emotions? And I was like, well, but they're not my emotions, I can be understanding that going through that process, you're going to have some serious emotions. I can also control how far I take you down the path, because there's, oh, my husband is horrible. And there's the person that comes in and say, yeah, tell me how horrible they are. And then there's the other people that say, I understand, I think husbands sometimes do act horrible. I get it. Mine does sometimes too. But they also have some benefits. Like, I haven't taken the trash out in a decade or more, it's just not on my list anymore, so there is you control and I don't think it's positivity or negativity. I think you control the energy. And if you can, and it's not like saying, stop crying. Don't cry. You're making everybody embarrassed. You're making us uncomfortable. It's like, do you need some space? Do you need some time? Should we, what do you feel that you need, as opposed to me saying what you should do? And I think that that's a different, space. To me, mediation and all of this, because I deal with numbers and people have really heightened emotions about money. It's all psychology. It's all interpersonal dynamics. And to me, if you can tune in to people, I think you can be a good mediator. And then you layer in all the stuff that we've talked about. But a lot of that is in connecting on a human level. And if that's a difficulty, I think that that's a difficulty in some of the mediation, unless, that's the kind of personality that's required, of course. But
well said. Very well said. William Ury in all of his trainings talks about separating the people from the problem. And when people come into mediation, the other person is the problem, right? And it's like, even in your example of the husband and wife, my husband, did this horrible thing, so now he's a horrible person. And so separating the behavior from the person, like that's kind of my job as a mediator, is to say that behavior, what he did, really hurt you or was hard for me, rather than make it all about him, to try to make it about his behavior. And I use parts. I say a part of. So a part of this person did this, to make it not whole and global, to try to keep, I don't like problems to be exploding big. I know they feel that way, but they aren't that way, right? So it's a part of that person. It's not all of them.
Absolutely.
And making sure that you don't have that connection become enmeshment, which is what I think you're talking about. If you become enmeshed with these people, the bond is too close, and now you're not going to be as effective when instead you listen and feel without joining.
Yeah. And I think I think that's an important thing for attorneys to understand if they get into mediation, is that, I see a lot of attorneys that really sort of take on the emotions of their client, right, during a litigation process. And I think if they're used to doing that, then that's kind of a habit or something that you have to correct and kind of bring back and say, I do something crazy when I go into mediations or even litigation and testifying, because it's such high stress or whatever kind of gets your adrenaline going. And I'm just like, it's not my circus. It's not
That's right.
my monkeys. It's not my kids' health. It's not my health. It's not my husband. Nobody in my family is going to die if I don't do an amazing job at this. So can I be the best? Can I show up? And can I do whatever it is? And I kind of try to get okay, universe, help me. Don't help me know when we need to stop. help me know when we should go further or go this way or go that way. And then I think all you're doing is you're not waiting for some divine intervention per se. You're just trying to be more open to like hear the nuances, right? To hear the whispers, to hear the, ooh, I saw that person. This is a big one when they look at their watch, right? Okay, you're done. You're done with this at this point, right? And it could just be a nuance. Yeah. What, Kim?
What does that mean that you're looking at your watch?
Mm-hmm.
Because the story you're telling yourself is that they're done. Maybe it means something else. So I notice you're looking at your watch. What does that mean? And hearing you talk, the one thing we forgot to talk about that is probably one of the most powerful tools we have is silence.
Yes.
So I do exactly what you said, have to remind myself that I don't have to have the answers. I don't own the answers. I don't even own the next sentence. And to be comfortable to sit in silence, something always happens. It's crazy. It's crazy. Someone will fill that silence and then it'll go. Like, I think being in the moment creates exactly what you were talking about, this flow that just happens. If I'm not trying to steer and make the flow, it just happens. I still find that just amazing at the end of a mediation. Amazing. It's kind of, you walk out going, what just happened? Because it just works.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people oftentimes say that the best mediations is where everyone walks away unhappy. And frankly, I want to disagree with that idea. I think people might not always get exactly what they want from the mediation, but what do they really want? They want to be done with the conflict. And if they can walk away being done with the conflict, that is a win-win.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what they thought they wanted is not, when you come in thinking, I want this, this, and this, and then it completely changes throughout the process of the mediation. I mean, that's the beauty of it. So you may not leave, you probably won't leave. Chances are you won't leave with what you came in thinking that you had to have, but that's not to say that you're not coming out even better than when you went in, you know?
Absolutely.
For the collateral things that come out of it, like you're talking about, Elliot. Even just peace, being heard, because it is never about the issues. It really isn't about the money or the grandma's pottery or whatever it is that they're fighting about. It really isn't about that. It's always about the things that make being heard such an important part of mediation being successful, of people wanting to mediate more. And not so much for companies. I get for big companies and insurance things, it probably doesn't work like that. But for individuals, I think that's the most important part.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that, people could listen to this and be like, okay, I just have to be silent. I just have to listen. Like, this is easy. And those aren't easy when we're kind of problem solver people. And we're like, well, I'm going to, like, you came to me with a problem, I'm going to solve it. And it's like, no, you're just going to facilitate and help them. Like, I sometimes call us like master brainstormers. Like, how do we okay, do you have some ideas? Do you have some ideas? Let's talk about, could that come up with another idea? Oh, what about that? I think that part of that is just trying to facilitate it. But that's where I think it goes a lot deeper, and you have to do a lot of soul searching, because in essence, people most of the time are just like they're risk averse, they are conflict averse, and they can't even say, put the toilet paper roll the other way because I like it that. Like, they cannot say what they need or want. And they might be in a relationship or a family situation or even in a job situation where they can't say that and they don't feel like they can do that. And that's where I think some of it gets a little bit of an issue, is that everybody's like, just fix it. Just tell me how to fix it. And then we'll be done, because I don't want to have hard conversations. And that's where I think if you continue to read and focus on how do people have hard conversations? How do you just start to have conversations and not say money conversations are hard, or intimacy conversations are hard, or kid conversations are hard, but we live in this society that we feel like judged by everything, and people do judge you, but we take that as important. And I think if you can get out of some of that space, then you can be really successful, and you can be successful in dealing with people that have no desire to have these conversations, really.
I love that. One of my passions is to normalize conflict. So I've given talks on conflict. My favorite is called Confidence and Conflict Skills at Work. But I had a group of CPAs wanting a continuing education talk, and I said, "Well, how about conflict?" And they're like, "Oh no, it's a word like mediation that people go, So I changed it to confidence and conflict, and to try to normalize, like, we need conflict, right? But the thing is, I say, how did you learn to do conflict when you were growing up, when you were the source of conflict? What happened to you when you were the problem? What do we do to our kids when they're the problem? Do we put you in timeout? Do we tell you, you're not good enough to be around, go stand in a corner? Do we yell and scream? Do we spank? I mean, what do we do? Because that's why we've grown up not being able to have hard conversations, not being able to express our needs. I mean, you're exactly right. We haven't learned how to do these things. And then we grow up and we don't feel like we have a right to. You know what I'm saying? It all makes sense. And then there's the biology of conflict in it too. But to get people to understand that the conflict you're going through, lots of people go through. This is normal. It's hard, but it's normal. And my job is to make it safe. And we haven't learned to make it safe for each other. We've only learned how to defend ourselves or how to hurt to protect ourselves, right? So this is a skill. And by mediating, we can mirror the skills that are learned, how to communicate in conflict. I think 99.9% of the time, I have good people in front of me who are just hurting. They're just stuck in conflict and hurting. And once that can come down to what they're hurting and who they are, and not just how awful the other person is, that's when you start having people who can see each other as humans and can start building consensus, or, their bridges and their middle grounds, or not middle grounds, but the places they're able to be. But we haven't learned how to do this. And then life gets hard because it's life, and we don't know what to do next. So we blame the other person, Right. And another thing William Ury always says, the most difficult person in any conflict, without fail, is the one in the mirror. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's hard. It's hard. Real quick story. So I talk a lot about conflict because I think it's a great thing to normalize too, and to learn skills for it. As a mediator, I think we have to. But my youngest son is 18, and when he was 17, I took him in bed every night, and I took him in and his room's a mess, and I'm fussing at him, and he's getting mouthy back. And about the point where I wanted to take a pillow and smother him, instead I turned around and walked out of the room, which is avoidance. That's the fight, flight, and freeze. I'm running, which is what I do. I get halfway down the stairs and I hear this voice behind me say, "And you call yourself a conflict manager?" And you know what? I loved that because it reminded me how hard this is. It is hard. It's not easy. We have to learn how to do it.
Yeah. No, and your analogy with kids is amazing, because I try to reward my children for having calm conversations about issues that, they usually start crying and screaming and stuff like that, and then they get nothing, or whatever it was, there's no results or reward. But at the point, and my 5-year-old is so good at it now, like she can, like she sees it and she'll just switch, and she's like, okay, mommy, so I really think that I would like the grapes. I know it's too late to have the snack, but like, and it's fascinating because I think that, I do want to empower people to just be able to say what they need and their truth, regardless of whatever is going to happen. We also have said, like, if you want to cry, you should cry as long as you want.
That's
Like,
right.
you might not be able to cry right here.
Mhm.
I might prefer you to cry in your room or something, but you can cry for as long as you want because we have emotions and it's hard and you're frustrated and I get it, but I think that's really powerful because a lot of things that we say we should do with our kids or people tell us what to do with our kids actually is really good advice in mediation too.
That's
Wait
right.
till your kids start to present PowerPoint presentations to tell you why they should get what they want. Okay?
Yep.
It happens.
Yep.
It's I mean, it's just like the medical reports that I'm given and the mediation summaries. Preparing the mediator with a presentation. Eventually, your kids are going to do that. Trust me.
I do have a sales. We think he could probably sell ice to Eskimos. Like, he is so good and he's so subtle about it. So he's really paying attention, because I always try to make my kids think it was their idea or my husband. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. Oh, yeah, I texted you that idea. Yeah, okay, great. But anyway, well, I think this conversation is probably going to be, we're going to probably split it up into 2 segments because it was so amazing, so powerful. I think we offered some advice to people kind of starting out and that are in this space. And so I think it's been very helpful information. And I think that we're going to kind of show different ways that you can reach out to Elliot, different ways that you can reach out to Kim, and all sorts of different things. Did you want to, as we kind of close this out, Kim, to just tell us a little bit more about the book that you wrote?
Yes.
And what it means to people and how you created it?
Thank you, Melissa. I really appreciate that. So the book is How to Live Forever, a guide to writing the final chapter of your life story. And it's interesting that it came out during COVID because we're now talking more about end of life things, right? So
Yep.
in it, I tell stories of my that I've witnessed of people in their end of life phases as a trauma ER nurse, ICU nurse, and I say that talking about death and dying is the final frontier in taboo subjects that we don't talk about, and by not having these discussions. We're all going to die. So I want to normalize conflict and I want to normalize death. And I bet I don't get invited to many parties when that is my passion, right? But so I call it living well all the way to the end, right? So if we prepare, if we know who we want to be around our decisions for healthcare, our legal decisions, I feel like we turn our power over to attorneys to write things without knowing exactly what we want all the time, or who we want to have it, how we want to leave our legacy. So my belief is our life is our story, and it's ours to write all the way to the end, and all of it matters. And the decisions that we need to make ahead of time. So A, bad things don't happen to us because we didn't. And B, we don't leave our families with a mess to clean up, include the legal decisions, definitely the healthcare decisions. And it's, I always say, if you haven't read How to Live Forever, if you haven't read Atul Gawande's Being Mortal, it's probably the best book I've ever read about the aging process, the healthcare systems, and what's normal. And we treat ourselves like we're cars going to get a tune-up when something's wrong, and a hospital or doctor is supposed to fix us no matter what. And we're suffering greatly for, instead of accepting that we're going to die, wanting to live at all costs. So empowering people to make a decision of what their quality of life is that they want to have to be able to participate fully and not be tortured. And then even in the celebration of life, leaving their story as their legacy, relationships, how to discuss conflict in relationships. Over 50% of people who at end of life are estranged from people. And we estrange ourselves from enough people, we end up alone at the end of life. And nobody wants that, again, for not having learned conflict. So tools and prompts around that. And then to tie that all neatly in a bow, it's how mediation can help us have all of those discussions, because they are hard, but we're all better off having done this. So it's not really a book about dying. It's hopefully a book about living well all the way to the end. And I know we don't know when that is. Like we make assumptions, right? And I know people who have died from infancy to, 100+ years, and we just don't know. So not taking our lives for granted.
I love it. That's very powerful.
Thank you.
So amazing. Thank you so much, both of you.
It's so good to meet you.
Yeah, this was fabulous. And I think it is so long that we're probably going to make it into 2 parts, but woo, we got some good stuff in here. So thank you both. Whenever Elliot comes up with a fabulous idea again, we're going to do it. So hopefully we'll see you both again. Maybe we can talk about even more psychological, emotional, strategic viewpoints of mediation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Elliot. Good to see you.
Good to see you both.
All right. I'll see y'all soon.
Thanks.